Mary Adams seems to have found her niche, or maybe a couple of them. She's the president of ECG, a boutique-ish event management firm that has evolved over the past decade and a half to concentrate on the financial sector. And along with that, she works with some of those clients, as well as others, to manage some financial-related associations. Some folks want to be all things to all people, but we all know that's mostly an unattainable goal. But this highly focused approach that Mary and ECG embraces allows a company to actually be all things to a very focused group of people. That is attainable, and that is smartly scalable. That is a model that can be studied and implemented by others struggling to successfully adapt and work within the events realm. Now, I met Mary through another one of her niches, the Bergen County Professional Women's Network, which she created in 2012 and grew based on the demand for a hyper-local group of professional women who wanted the opportunity to share experiences, garner education, and grow their circles, and not, quite frankly, have to travel into the big city to get all of that. So she's got a lot of focused effort, and that adds up to a pretty successful strategy. Let's get to yakking with Mary Adams.
Playback ending in 5.
Stand by fake music, stand by talent.
3, 2, 1. Clear.
Music go. Talent go. Welcome to Event Yak, where event pros share their stories about the past, present, and future. I'm your host, Terri Walters. I want to welcome Mary Adams to the show. Thanks for being on Event Yak with me, Mary.
Thanks for having me, Terri.
You're up in Bergen County, New Jersey. We're both in the great state of New Jersey. You're in northern New Jersey, and you're in Bergen, which is kind of the epicenter of the COVID thing in New Jersey. Have you, I'll start right off with the, I keep calling it the elephant in the room. Have you heard anything good, bad, and different about what's going on with that?
Well, I actually now like to say it's the elephant in the Zoom because we're not in the same room together anymore.
Brilliant.
I'm living half of my life on Zoom. So, yeah. Most definitely I have. I mean, I clearly live just moments away from one of the largest testing centers that they keep highlighting on the national news here at Bergen Community College. And, I feel it every day. I see it every day. And, being in the events world, I've been rocked by it, I would say, every day as well. So I think that, this week we had some sort of a concert to benefit New Jersey and a lot of those who are suffering the most. So I think highlighting it nationally and potentially globally really gives you a depiction of what's happening here on the ground.
Okay. All right. So you and I both met at one of your networking events. You, in addition to having an event management company, which we'll get to after this, but I want to talk about your networking group, which is Bergen County Professional Women's Network. Tell me a little bit about that and why and how you kind of got into that.
Sure. So, we met several years ago at one of the BCPWN events. It is a local network that comprises largely Fortune 500 professionals as well as solopreneurs within the area. And they are from all different disciplines representing, a wide variety of industries and professional expertise. And what we do typically is host 2 to 3 types of events per month. And it's really what you make of it. You can participate to the extent that you can and want to, and obviously that participation these days looks a little bit different. The reason that we started it and have continued to grow the community is that we saw a need to bring together and educate and foster sort of a multifaceted I would say, arena for knowledge sharing as well as just camaraderie in the area as well. So there are tons of them in New York City, and we just saw sort of a niche and a need to bring women together in this particular area.
What types of like educational programs do you guys typically do there? And I say guys, which is like I just caught myself. What do you ladies typically do as far as education? Like what kind of things do you talk about and try to learn?
Sure. And we don't discriminate against men at all. We have men that frequently attend and participate, and it's really meant to be all-inclusive. So that's not too bad of a slip. Right. So the speakers that we bring in typically for our first Friday luncheon, which naturally falls on the first Friday of each month, we bring in an outside person, someone who's a non-member. And those topics could range from including diversity of thought and diversity of humans in the workplace or just in your lives to how to professionally leverage LinkedIn or Twitter or social media to, very boots on the ground type of, we've got a panel discussion coming up that's going to sort of stick with the times here. It's entitled The Great Pause, and looking at your life from all facets. So we have a financial advisor, a psychologist, a divorce attorney, because there are clearly some matrimonial issues that arise and other types of relationship issues that sort of surface during these times. So we try to stay very relevant. We ask our members what they need and want to hear and want to talk about and address. As I said, address that elephant in the Zoom. So that's how we stay current and relevant. And that's the type of programming that we do on the first Friday. And then our networking breakfast happen the third Tuesday of each month, and that's where we showcase our members' expertise. So, for instance, one of our members, Lisa Harris, owns a professional organizing business, and she sat with us and gave a brilliant presentation about just ways to organize your paper life, or your you saw me struggling with my wired life right before we started here with my headset being in a million knots. Some of those frustrating pieces that clutter your mind and your space, and she was just brilliant at helping us with some of the tips to avoid that. So that gives you sort of a broad range, mostly business topics, though, we cover.
It's business topics, and I look at the networking piece that you do and the event management. Why, I guess, did you launch the networking component of what you have going on?
Yeah, so I would say my whole life is dedicated to connecting humans, and this is just an offshoot more so of ECG than vice versa. So this just brings it to a local level, whereas with ECG, the Meeting Planning and Association Management firm, I'm doing work on behalf of clients, and I'm traveling around the country, around the world, whatever they need to help fulfill their mission. This is locally based. I live and work in the community. I've just seen it grow sort of organically. We don't do a lot of advertising or anything of that nature. It's really by word of mouth and the right fit of attendee just sort of and member just sort of organically happens. So it all evolves around the same premise that that's sort of my life's work, is to bring humans together. So
cool. I know you say that your group is inclusive, and do you see that men and women network differently?
Sure. Yeah, most definitely I do. And I think that's I think men, women, different age groups, we all network very differently. And I could have a peer my same age and demographic essentially network very differently because my personality is very different. Some may say that I could talk to a lamppost for 20 minutes and I would have a perfectly engaging conversation because I have the gift of gab, so to speak. Whereas someone else's approach, for instance, of walking into a large cocktail reception might be to connect with one person in the room, and that's really all they care to do and that's all they enjoy to do. And it's a very, very different approach. So to say it's a male-female delineation, I would say it's really very, very individual on people's approach.
That's interesting. what would you say to somebody, so like me, I don't consider myself a good networker. What would you say to someone like me who's going to come to your networking situation? How do I kind of break out of my shell?
I don't think I would tell you to break out of your shell. I would tell you to first figure out what you're looking for. Sort of define your objective. And this is sort of how I look at most situations. When I was younger, I can say I used to approach a networking event or, a conference that I was attending to figure out what I was going to get out of it, right? And so my approach now is very different, almost a 180, where I'll go into a scenario thinking about what I can offer others around me, right? So if I were you and I were shy or just a little hesitant to walk into a situation, and I just wasn't comfortable talking to a group of 10 or even 3 people, I would try to connect with one person and find out if there was a way that you could help them, talking about you and your expertise, or that doesn't have to be the lead off. Asking questions and getting someone else to talk is a great conversation starter.
I think that's great advice, because you're really there to find out about other people. I mean, you're there, I guess, to impart your value, I guess. But to me, that's always the hard part for me to kind of, create and articulate my value statement. That's a lot of pressure for me.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily think it has to be, your elevator pitch or statement right then and there. It's asking those generative questions that maybe it's later on, maybe it's a day or two after you meet that person with a follow-up email, or, I know you were concerned about X. Here's a great book that I read that might be valuable to you, and there's your value statement. It doesn't necessarily have to be a quote-unquote statement.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting. You're helping me to kind of reshape my thought about networking. It's always been such a stressful idea for me. I don't know why that is. It just has been. I feel like, you have to go there and you have to be able to, articulate whatever it is you want to get across, but it's more really, I guess, getting to know a person and create a relationship first. And I talk about this, because there's a lot of people, hopefully, that listen to this, maybe new to the business, or maybe coming out of, what we have going on here socially, looking for new ways to connect. But to think about it really as creating a personal relationship, as opposed to going in and saying, I need to go and get X number of business things.
Right. No, I think that all comes back to what I'm mentioning. It is a connection. It's a human connection. It could be you want to meet that one person and you look them up, do some research on LinkedIn and say, oh, I didn't realize we went to the same undergrad, or, just to make yourself feel a little bit more comfortable in the situation. But it really is just finding that connection point. And frankly, you're just not going to connect with everyone that you anticipate potentially doing so. If there's one person you wanted to meet and you're like, well, actually, we just don't really jive well, or I don't feel there's much I can offer, or vice versa, that's okay. Don't judge yourself there. Just kind of move on and find the right fit.
And I think you're right. I mean, you go into it thinking certain things, and this happens to me a lot. It's I go in thinking one thing is going to happen, and you're pleasantly surprised by maybe somebody else or something else you learn.
Right.
Yeah.
I actually stopped carrying business cards because what are you going to do with that? You're just going to put it in your pocket, your briefcase. You're going to find it in that suit jacket that you haven't had dry cleaned yet. And I think there are just other ways to connect. There's an email, there's a phone call. God forbid you get out a piece of paper and write a handwritten note. That's sort of like, the antiquated the way to do it, and it makes a big impact, or sending an article, or even one of your podcasts. I think it's a great way to say, hey, thought you might enjoy this. You might laugh at this. I've been mentioning on some of my webinars lately that I've just been getting a kick out of the COVID-related memes and videos, because life is really funny right now. Because, poof, all of a sudden I've now become a hairdresser, a chef, a psychologist, in addition to being a mom and a teacher and a business owner, all sorts of things, and I can't do all that well. So here we are.
We're all diversified. Yeah. My favorite meme, I think, is this giant bear that's it looks like a giant balloon bear, and it says, me coming out of the COVID hibernation. He looks like a giant balloon, but anyway, that's I find myself eating, thinking about what I'm going to do for lunch and what I'm going to do for dinner more than most other thoughts.
Of course.
But so let's kind of transition into ECG, which is your company, your events management company. Am I describing it correctly? ECG.
Yeah, it's about 50-50 meeting, pure play meeting planning, but the other side of it is association management, where I'm managing either wholly or in part 501c6 organizations and largely in the financial services industry as well. And a lot of the members of those associations are individual clients as well. So that's sort of how my business grows, is it's built on those relationships that I've created through the association itself.
And ECG, if you look at the meeting planning aspect of it, I kind of was looking at it and saying it's kind of a niche, and I say niche. There's, when did niche become niche? I don't know when that happened, but so it's a niche thing. But I look at like niches are they're the wave of the future. Like there's food markets, they niche down, olive oils, your doctor, coffee. Do you think that you've been kind of focused from the kind of very beginning. It's kind of like us. We were boutique when boutique wasn't cool, so you're like kind of a niche operation from the very beginning. Why do you think has that first of all, it obviously has worked for you, right?
Well, I haven't been from the beginning, probably since you and I have known one another, yes. So I actually started the meeting planning business in 2004, and I was running, really creating and executing conferences in all different industries. So I spanned from medical device manufacturing to online retail to, I know there was a publishing conference I wrote. So essentially, it's the same skill set to produce a conference. But what I was finding is when I went to go build the business or, prospect a new client, they were basically saying to me, there's no way that a medical device manufacturing conference can be the same as I'm trying to think of like my beauty conference. I always do B2B. I don't know why I chose beauty. But anyway, something so diverse. And so essentially I was trying to be all things to all people in the way I was approaching it. And so in 2013, I rebranded and refocused 100% on the financial services industry. And that definitely has worked for me. It sort of puts some parameters around the size of the market that I'm going after. I know financial services is an enormous space, but I've actually niched down to the defined contribution space, which is pretty narrow. And it's been just a tremendous path for me to take because I've built some wonderful relationships throughout that. And, I run into a lot of the same people at different conferences or or at associations, whatever it might be. So I have found that being more specific and targeted really has worked well for me.
I think there's two ways. Well, there's probably multiple ways to approach, meeting management, meeting production. It's, you're either somebody who comes in and is bigger and can work as a vendor across all the different types of events. And then the way that you're doing it, I think actually is really, really smart, because what it does is you personally become much more invested in the client and how they think and the nuances, which I think is what's really important. You become a trusted advisor.
That's a phrase that I continually use. We are I actually called myself a vendor once to a client that is a current client today, and he said, "Don't say that. You're on our staff calls. You're part of our team." He said, "You're not a vendor to us. I mean, maybe that's how you're paid or how we're structured, but you don't act that way." And in fact, I've been working on their conferences for I think 6 years now, and a lot of their members don't actually know that I have my own firm. They see us as very much integrated into their team because that's how we look, act, and feel. And in other instances, we have clients entrust us with handling relationships of their best and top clients. So to me, that's the ultimate, compliment and I would say demonstration of trust. They're saying, go ahead, call our best clients and work with them on this conference coming up. We don't need to oversee that. We really value what you're bringing to the table and trust you to be an extension of our brand.
Do you think because you've created this kind of trusted partner thing here, are they at this point asking you about how you think the COVID situation is going to play out?
Yeah, that has largely been what I've been working on for the last 6 weeks or so. Most definitely. So I would say even a shift prior to the pandemic, a little bit of my business has already started to move toward being more strategic rather than, I've got clients that have hired me for looking long-term strategic stakeholder engagement within larger organizations to put on, for instance, an investor conference. And so this sort of plays right into that. That same client that hired us for this strategy is saying, all right, our event is in October 2019. What are you thinking here? What are you seeing?
2019, 2020?
2020.
Okay, that's good.
I'm sorry.
I know we're all stuck in a time warp.
COVID-19, 2020. Yeah. Maybe if we could go back, that would be helpful.
Yeah, exactly.
So, even like 3 or 4 weeks ago, I would have said, October, you're totally safe, you're fine. But obviously, daily, the situation's evolving. So, yes, they are coming to me saying, not necessarily what's your crystal ball, but I'm finding myself going back to my business school days and doing SWOT analysis and trying to figure out what to do in the interim to engage their clients and potentially move those off. But immediately I went into, like triage mode. How are we going to work with both parties, for instance, a venue and the client, to make sure that everyone's a winner here to some extent, but obviously my client is let out of a lot of financial liability.
Right. I've seen you as an event manager, but you're growing into something more than that. And when I say trusted partner as it relates to the event management and even the association management part, which I want to come back to, mm-hmm. You're a much bigger entity at this point, as far as the strategy.
Most definitely, yes. Even those who just, may initially hire us for, negotiate contracts, find a site, a venue for us, help us plan, all of the intricacies ahead of an event and then, execute on site, are coming to us saying, let's talk about, the speaker lineup here. Do you have options for us to bring in a keynote? What do you think about ESG? What do you think about, these hot topics? Are they overdone? Are they, so that they're coming at us from all facets. And because we are specific and knowledgeable in this space, we're bringing an additional, value set there that, I always say meeting planners are a dime a dozen, but what we bring here is specific knowledge of the space and also some of the constraints, such as, compliance or just perception even in the industry.
Well, and this is what being a niche, I keep laughing when I say that word. This is what being kind of a niche operator kind of brings for you. And this is why I think it's important for people to think about it. Some people want to get into the business and go out and be as diverse as possible. And it may not be, especially coming out of this, it may not be the right direction. People need to look at who they really have the ability to service and actually how to do that. Yeah.
And, it took a while, I would say, as an entrepreneur that's been on my own now for 16 years, it takes a while to be able to say, you know what, no, that's not a great fit for me. Because at first you'll take whatever client comes your way, right? You'll sort of, you've got to build the business, build your experience. Oh yeah, I could try that. I could stretch myself into there. And I'm not at all adverse to stretching and growing, but if it's not the right fit, it's painful for everyone. One of my favorite quotes is by E.E. Cummings. It takes courage to grow up and be who you really are. And I think, that takes some time to get there. And I feel like I'm certainly not there yet, but a lot closer.
Okay, great. So let me ask you this. So everybody kind of talks about return on investment with events and with exhibits and things like that. Do you think that return on investment kind of has changed? It used to be, I go to a trade show, I spend this much money on it, and I need to meet this many people, and I need to convert this many into sales, and that if I can do that, my return on investment has been met. How do you think that has changed?
Well, so my experience with my clients now is very different than what it was. So, at first I was running more of a trade show model, those types of things. So exhibitors would be manufacturing suppliers. So that model, I would say, is still intact there. But any type of event has different objectives. And what a lot of these companies that are hosting conferences and events do is miss that whole exercise of setting objectives and saying, let's define success prior to actually launching this thing, right?
Good point.
So, in hindsight, they're saying, well, we don't actually know if it was successful. Yet Joe in sales says, well, no, we're not successful because I haven't gotten X amount of sales, 2 months after. But then if you start delving into it, the sales cycle is really more like 8 months. So you kind of understand where I'm going here. It's all very different. But now what I would say with my current clients, it's some of it's direct investing, sure, because I'm running investor conferences, and you'll see an influx of money after you have a group of advisors sit in a room and you do your dog and pony about your your portfolio and your investment strategy, et cetera. Some of it's very direct, some of it's not. Some of it is it takes a lot longer. Some of it is ego-driven internally at a company. I think Phyllis did a bang-up job on her keynote presentation there, and she's never been comfortable speaking in front of a group. So to her, that conference was a huge success. So different stakeholders within an organization or within a host have different metrics for success. So it's just important to make sure that A, they're set, B, they're aligned, and C, you've actually analyzed them post-event to make sure that you're meeting them. And sort of take into, that whole analysis needs to take into consideration what's going on there. Meaning, obviously we have an environment now that is impacting absolutely everything. So if you did an event last week, you know why it's going to be impacted, but make sure at that post-event, post-mortem, as they say, you're taking into consideration there's a global pandemic.
Yeah. Tell me.
I mean, don't miss that one.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
FYI, don't miss that one.
So for an event to be executed successfully, there has to be planning. So, and this is actually a really good point. So you've got like the beginning stages, you've got the thing itself, and then you've got the follow-up. Tell me how you go into each event and, what are the important pieces that can ensure that, any event, not just anything that's, what do events need to be successful, beginning, middle, and end?
Yeah, so there's so many different facets there. I don't think I can cover them all, but
no.
some of it's monetary, some of it is branding and exposure, some of it is engagement. Another part could be team building, if it's an internal event. So, there are just so many areas there. So the way I approach it is, and we're doing this, right now with a client, saying, we know you did this last year. And did you find it successful? We weren't involved last year. And so we're gauging whether they went through this exercise or not. So that's number one. We're finding they didn't, because marketing thinks it was a huge success. They were under budget. They didn't have a massive, audio-visual snafu, whereas, the internal PMs are saying, I didn't even get any airtime here to talk about what I wanted to talk about. So I guess what I'm driving home is it's all that whole stakeholder analysis. Who's involved? Who reaps a benefit from it? And let's not forget the audience. Okay, so for this particular example, I'm using it as an investor conference example. And this is where, an asset manager brings in their top clients. And so we'll be talking about the agenda and really in the weeds. And I'll have to say, or someone on my team will say, has anyone asked your clients what they'd like to hear? And it's almost, like sometimes that's a pin drop moment where if there's dead silence, they're sort of baffled, and they forget that there's another huge stakeholder, literally in the room, that matters here. And, that's another way of assessing it. What does the post-event survey look like? Were the attendees happy? Did they receive any value from it? So, I mean, that's kind of a question that could take years to answer.
Yeah.
But you get the magnitude of it. I mean, it's really critical to make sure that you're considering everybody's perspective and what they want out of it.
Yeah, and I just did a blog post about connecting with your audience. It's on emotion. Like for me, I've always thought that you can talk at people and talk to people, but unless you connect with them somehow, emotionally, with something,
right.
You're not going to have that relationship. And you're not going to have that call to action. But to your point, I mean, a lot of times, and I've had this too, and I'm interested to see how you steer people. How do you actually get these people that you work with to create a call to action? It's always, there has been a lot of situations in my life where people say, let's do a meeting. Yeah, we do this meeting every year. How do you get them to say and focus? What is the actual thing the audience needs to get out of this?
So sometimes I will admit we don't get them to see that. Sometimes you've got just a myopic, leader in the group that refuses to change. It's one of those things where you can lead the horse to water, but can't force them to sort of see that whole aspect of things. In that case, that's where we say that this isn't the right fit. Because we're, not that we're saying if you don't do it our way, then we're not working with you. We're just saying I think you're missing an enormous point here, and we're going to be tied to the failure in the end if we're not. Oh, go ahead.
And let me just stop you. Do you walk away from that? Is that something you have like? And that's courage for me. I mean, and I'm not putting you on the spot. I mean, I go through a lot of stuff, and I don't walk away from it. I want to, but I don't. But would that be something that you would walk away from?
I don't as much anymore because I've built a skill set to sort of navigate through it and around it. The other piece is I've gotten, much more adept at identifying the right/wrong client ahead of time. And that's just a hit and a miss for many years. And I've definitely walked away. I've walked away from the most lucrative client I've ever had. And, lessons learned afterwards, yes, I would approach it differently now in hindsight, but, that's what happens in where the learning moments are.
Well, I mean, I don't even know that maybe like for me, I've walked away from big clients too. And I don't necessarily, I regret that I don't have the work, but I don't regret that the moment that I made the decision to say bye-bye.
Right. Something happened this year. A client wasn't getting back to us about Q1 events. And I just sort of knew there was a new leader in their department, and I could tell he was sort of watching us work last year. And I already knew, it was predisposed. He already had thought, I don't know these people. These aren't my people, and I'm bringing in my regime. And I knew that, sort of along the way, and it had been a client that learned a lot along the way. I am very fortunate to have had them, and it was time for us to really separate. And so when we got that call, I wasn't surprised at all. I mean, I knew what the call was going to be about. He came in, he had his own agencies, worked with them for years. And I felt lighter after, yes, there's money, but that's, that's not the priority there. I felt much, much lighter, and it created more space for different types of work to inflow.
You and I, we sound like we live parallel lives sometimes. It's, and it's weird, we had a very similar experience, but We've had that throughout. I mean, through 20 years, I call it like the honeymoon period sometimes with certain groups.
Yeah.
But there's always something when a new leader comes in. There's always something going on. Now, when you come in with the new leader, that's always a good place to be.
Right.
Right.
And sometimes you're on different sides of that, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're the windshield, sometimes you're the bug kind of thing. So COVID-19 has pretty much crushed everyone's business. The people in finance, especially have had kind of a heck of a ride, up and down, roller coaster wise. If you look at the Dow, and if that's, it may not be everybody's indicator, but it is an indicator of the volatility that's happening.
Right.
How do you see your sector kind of coming out of this? And then how do you, then we'll go right into what you see for events as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly, as you said, a rough ride. I think there are a lot of analysts, there are a lot of thought leaders out there that are just baffled still. This was sort of the I never could have predicted category. I certainly don't know what the financial status will be of our country and our world and that whole system. I see budget cuts coming. They were already sort of coming at the beginning of this year. So that certainly will impact, both the association and the events world. It's going to look a little bit differently. But on the flip side of that, I will say that, we still have to connect. Humans need to connect. There's no replacement for that connection. We still need information. We still need to collaborate, and that's the only way we're going to get through it. So it's those firms and individuals that know how to position that properly who will succeed. That's sort of how I see that. We are moving, I'm rolling right into what the events world will be, but, of course we're moving into virtual connection right now, but again, I don't see that as a replacement down the road. It just will be some time until we can get there. And what I think time-wise is not this year. I think it's probably Q2 2021 before we get fully back into the room with one another. I'm not sure I'll ever shake anyone's hand again.
We all have to come up with a new way to, say hello. The elbow bump just doesn't do it for me.
No. Yeah. I mean, I had a board meeting with one of my associations at the beginning of March. That's the last trip I took, March 5th. And it was almost painful not to give people hugs that I've worked with for, close to 10 years and built wonderful relationships with. And, even the new members, I would have given them a handshake or, some sort of tap on the shoulder. That's just sort of how, how I operate. And it was almost painful to do that. And so I just don't foresee that we're going to be like that forever. In fact, I feel like I could just hug a stranger walking down the street right now. It's just sort of, it's an odd feeling to be separated and isolated.
Yeah. I mean, we're all, creatures that kind of we're herd, creatures, we like to kind of be with other people. And what do you think of this whole, I'm talking to people about Zoom and things like that sort. I know that, we all were plunged into the Zoom tank together.
Yeah. Yep.
It's just,
I think it's exhausting. First of all, just daily at first this was exhausting, but being on video is exhausting. However, it does really help. I mean, I don't know about you, but I hadn't seen your face in I don't know how many years, and just seeing your face, I started smiling. I thought, this is so great to see you. And why don't I do this more often? So yes, it does help. I think that, so much of what we communicate is through body language, and the conference calls just don't do it. And, I haven't been texting or emailing while we're on this call. I think it really helps with engagement and focus quite a bit. So I think it's important. I think that we have to keep it up. But I do think it's tiring. Someone said, "Are you really that tired after?" I said, "I just got off of like 4 hours of video call." I am exhausted. You're on stage all day.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's exactly it. And we're not used to that. Even when you're in the office, I mean, you're not, you duck into somebody's office, you have a quick conversation and you leave. It's not, somebody comes up with a Zoom and now suddenly everybody's forced to actually come up with some kind of contribution.
Right. Right.
So I think that's why it's so exhausting. But it comes like full circle back to the whole conversation from the beginning with your networking and being present. I think that it's interesting that you point out that, I have been on video chats with people where they are not present. But I've been in meetings where people are not present.
That's true. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but being on video, it's just like, when we talk about, being on a podcast, how intimate it is. I'm sitting here, and even if we have like 4 other people on this, I can see what you're doing. I can see if you're not paying attention. It's because television really is an intimate medium.
Right.
So, but I don't know. I think coming out of this, there's going to be some kind of a hybrid setup to this. What do you think? And do you think that the finance people are open to something like that? Yeah,
I do. I think they've been forced to be a little bit more flexible with the digital space. Security is always a concern, and it will be on almost all of these platforms that we've got going. But they're all getting better very quickly at being more secure environments. I think that there will be some sort of a hybrid because I think the cost differential is going to be better too for, instead of a conference that was 2 days in person with a $60,000 food and beverage spend, you're going to be in your office. You're not going to have the travel, associated with it, travel costs and the time. I foresee a little bit of a hybrid, but just as there was, like 10 years ago, there was sort of a push for virtual trade shows and virtual meetings back then, and there was a big scare in the event space. And I still, and I'll preach it till my dying day, that I think humans want to be together. We want to be together in a room.
Yeah, and I think we get a lot. We get a lot out of that as far as doing business, because again, it comes back to relationships and what we were talking about before. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us here on Event Yak. It was great to see you. We have to, I think that the whole video chat, it actually has made us, I think it's made us more, and the whole COVID thing has made us need to kind of be with each other more.
Yeah. And be human, be kinder to ourselves and to others, I think.
Yeah. And just reach out. That's what I say to everybody.
Yeah,
I mean, people say to me, what can we do? Talk to your family, talk to your peers, reach out. I have people that I haven't talked to in a while. I mean, I know they're there, but that doesn't mean that I haven't done the right thing, by reaching out to them.
Yeah, I think that's, I just did a quick video message to my community too, just talking about reaching out for that very reason. Just because you haven't heard from them doesn't mean they're okay. And I think a lot of people are maybe hiding behind the fact that no one can see them. And sometimes that just the outreach, they might not actually want to talk or see you on video, but just the outreach could really impact somebody positively.
Well, that's a good place for us to wrap up here. Mary, how can people reach you if they want to get in touch with you?
Well, you can call 201-445-7007. You can email mary@eventgrp.com or visit us on our website, www.eventgrp.com.
Awesome. I'll put all that information in the show notes so that people can get in touch with you. Anybody that's got a financial bent and needs a whiz-bang producer here, reach out to Mary. And I appreciate you being with us, Mary. Let's stay in touch, okay?
Wonderful. Thanks, Terri.
Well, that's a wrap for this show. Hey, you can show us some love by subscribing to the show wherever you're listening to us. Subscribing is caring. You can also find us at eventyak.com. The opinions expressed on Event Yak are the opinions of our individual guests and not necessarily the organizations to which they're affiliated. Event Yak is a production of Moonfish Production Limited. Thank you for listening. Be kind, be safe, and stand by to stand by.